Whaling was a monstrous undertaking, and it had great effect commercially. It had great effect socially as well.
Welcome to Sea Class. My name is Crystal Rose, and I'm the Curator of Collections here at Mystic Seaport Museum. The 19th century commercial whale fishery was a monstrous undertaking, and today we're going to talk about the why of whaling. I'm joined here by our Curator of Maritime History, Mike Dyer, and he knows all things whaling, and so he's a perfect person to join us in today's episode. So we've got a model here in front of us.
Yeah, we do.
Mike, this is one of the over 2,000 models that we have in the collection, and one of the 31 models that we have specifically of the Charles W. Morgan.
Of the Morgan itself.
Yeah.
31 of them?
31
Wow.
of them.
Yeah. That's a good
so
collection.
yeah, this is called a cutaway model. So you can actually see what is going on below decks. So what are we looking at here, Mike? What's going on?
What's great about the Charles W. Morgan, and this model does a really excellent job of demonstrating that, is that this was a floating factory. So this whole vessel, which had about 30 people on board, 35 people on board, sailors, craftsmen like coopers and blacksmiths and carpenters and whatnot, plus officers, was dedicated to sailing out into the deep ocean to hunt whales of a couple of special species. So sperm whales, all of the various right whale species, gray whales periodically, humpbacks. These vessels had to be capacious, so they had to have plenty of room to stow cargo.
And you can actually see some of that
here. You can
here.
certainly see that. And you can see also that it's very sort of fat and round in the bow. So they were sort of bluff bowed so that they had plenty of cargo space. So we're looking at the larboard side of the bark, Charles W. Morgan.
What's the larboard side?
The larboard side, most people would call that the port side, but in the whale fishery they called it the larboard side, LB. And you can see that there's 3 boats lined up on the larboard side. There's the bow boat, and then the one in the middle was the waist boat, which was in the waist of the vessel. And then there's the larboard boat, which is sort of at the stern, or the quarter boat, so it's also called a quarter. And each one of those boats would have 6 men in it, and these boats would be lowered when the man at the masthead actually saw a whale.
There he is.
There he is. He's on the lookout. There's a blow, and it's time for action. So this is what we've come for.
Yeah.
So the men lower the boats, shimmy down the side, jump in the boat, and then they all pull. 6 guys. It takes 6 guys.
They're in these little boats.
They're 30 feet long. I mean, they look small on the model, but they're 30 feet long, and they would have everything in them. So lines, harpoons, lances, all of the oars. Yeah. Sometimes, these particular boats are rigged with sails and a mast, so they could sail if the wind was right, and off they would go, whaling.
Okay, Mike, so we've turned the model around. Yeah. You've got the cutting end stage, you've got the guys that are on the cutting end stage, they've got spades. What's going on over there?
Well, that's the important part of removing the blubber from the whale, removing the baleen from the mouth, removing the spermaceti from the head of a sperm whale. All of that takes place while the carcass is floating alongside the vessel, and the crew are on this sort of outrigger platform that's hanging from the side of the ship, nice and sturdy, thick planks, and
are they tied?
No, they've got a railing, and they lean up against the railing. They're not tied in place, but they lean up against the railing, and then they have these very long spades. Some of these things are 16 feet long. And they're chopping into the whale, so they've got a couple points of security, or they're leaning against the railing on the cutting stage, and they've got their tool, and they're working away. So the idea is to chop into the blubber and then haul that blubber on board and begin to make oil.
Yep. And they're making oil here in the tripods here. So
They
you
would
can
make oil
even see
in
those
the tripods. That's right.
So they're cutting up the whale, they're bringing the blubber on board, they are boiling down, trying out the whale, and they're doing all this for oil.
That's correct.
This seems
yeah.
to be the why of whaling.
That is absolutely the why of whaling. Yes, indeed. This process allowed for a product to be produced on the ship, which
Yeah.
is really interesting. It's out on the high seas, hunting on the high seas, extracting your commodity from this particular prey species, and then making a product of it on shipboard, which meant that a ship like the Charles W. Morgan, which might have a capacity of 2,000 barrels of oil, could stay out for years at a time. And as long as they had fresh water and were well outfitted, the vessel could stay out for years at a time, harvesting as many animals as they can fit into, into the capacity of the
hold.
of the holding. The barrels, the number of barrels that can actually be fit on board, and then they sail back to wherever it is they came from. So in many cases, they'd be sailing back to New Bedford or
New
Nantucket
London
or
or
New
Nantucket,
London, right? Mystic, right here
Yeah.
in Mystic. There were
Yeah.
whaling voyages out of Mystic, and then that product then would be taken off the vessel, carefully gauged. And this is a very important part of this whole story, is the gauging of the oil. How good a job did they actually do when they were boiling that blubber from those animals in the Arctic, or off the Galapagos Islands, or in the
Yeah.
Gulf of Mexico, or wherever it was that they were.
Mike, something that's kind of unusual that we have, I understand from you, because this
Yeah.
is not something that everybody would have done.
Well.
So while we're talking about oil, this is actually something, a box and samples that were, this was created and taken by Captain Frederick Helen Smith, who was on the bark Ohio in late 1870s. This is later, and he did this
Isn't that
this
something?
unusual little thing where he took what appears to be a sample of oil from each whale that was tried out.
Wow.
And he marks it. He marks it. It can be hard to see, but he marks it actually on each piece, and then he marks it up here, and then it's also in his logbook.
Oh, wow.
And then also in his wife's journal.
Huh.
And
look at that.
Yeah. You can even sniff it. It has a nice smell.
Sperm, 30 barrel,
Yep.
October 14th, 1875. So that's sperm oil from a 30 barrel whale.
Yeah.
Huh.
And you can match it up with the accounts in the logbook.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And Mike, one of my favorite things about this is that I talk about this all the time, is this red wax this red sealing wax appears on all of Fred's scrimshaw, so much of his scrimshaw, on Sally's scrimshaw, and even once we purchased a lap desk that belonged to him, and I turned it over. I was doing a condition report.
Yeah.
I turned it over, and there's a blob of red wax on the bottom. And I said, "This is definitely Fred Smith's." Yeah. So it's this is a special, quite a special little thing.
It's a great,
yeah.
it's a great artifact of the whale fishery for sure. Wow.
It's a really beautiful little
interesting.
piece. Yeah. So all right, how's the oil used? Why, okay, so we talked about gauging the oil, we've talked about collecting the oil, we've talked about storing it.
Yeah.
What is the oil for?
Well,
Lots of things. A few mainly.
sperm oil in particular, and spermaceti. Let's start with spermaceti, because spermaceti is really
What is spermaceti?
is really is really where American whaling matters, or it starts to matter, and it goes way back into the 18th century, and it's a waxy substance that is in the noses, extremely, as you know, anatomically, physiologically complex and
head.
weird
Yeah.
nose of the sperm whale.
Yeah.
And it probably serves multiple physiological functions, everything from buoyancy,
is what I-
right, to
Because they're deep divers,
they're
right?
Deep
They
divers.
go to great depths of hunting after their prey, which is
Yep,
squid.
exactly so.
Yeah.
And then they come right back up to the surface, and they don't get the bends. So
Yeah.
what's that all about?
They're incredible. Yeah.
But when they're down there in the depths, they also blast their prey with
like a
sonic clicks.
Yeah.
And those clicks move through the spermaceti organ. So this is in the head of the sperm whale, right? sperm whales have been washing ashore in various places for a long time. So people knew about sperm whales. They knew their heads were weird. They knew they had this stuff in them.
Yeah.
But the hunting of them was not something that it was something Americans started doing.
Right.
Americans put tri-works on their ships, and they sailed out into the deep ocean, and they purposely hunted sperm whales for that spermaceti wax to make candles. To get to your question,
Yes.
it was spermaceti candles, and it was
Yeah.
a process. You know, when that's
We actually have a
there's
spermaceti
one.
candle
Yeah,
here.
look at that.
It's pretty delicate.
Yeah,
but
it is pretty
a
delicate, but it's
True spermaceti
but it's
candle.
white, right? Like the oil in this lamp, it's more or less the same color because they would have been, sort of processed in a similar fashion, processed for retail use. And so, the candle trade.
Well, talking about processing,
Yeah.
should I show? I actually
Oh, right.
have this
Yeah,
really
let's move this oil
special,
out of the way. Oh, wow, look at that.
candle
this is a
mold
great
here.
thing.
Yeah.
So this is that's an A.D. Richmond. Yeah, that's a Richmond patent candle mold from New Bedford, and it was a patent. It's called a patent mold because it was made out of this combination of non-ferrous metals, which would not color or corrode the spermaceti as it was poured into them.
Oh, sure.
And if you look at this one, it's all crusted with crusted with spermaceti. And this is a great one. A.D. Richmond, they were a brass founder, right? So they were a brass foundry on North Water Street in New Bedford. Right, and this thing is made out of mahogany. When this was new, it was a lovely piece. It's made out of mahogany. It's got these beautiful sort of decorative feet carved on it. Why anybody would put decorative feet on a candle mold is beyond me, but they did. And on this one is stamped on this side.
Yeah,
it
is on this side too.
It says C.H. Leonard. What does that one say?
Yeah, it says COC and Company. Or is it? Yeah, is it COC and Company?
Yeah, it's Oliver Crocker. So Oliver Crocker and Charles H. Leonard, both firms sort of over time overtook one another. Right. So Charles H. Leonard bought the Crocker Spermaceti Works.
Okay.
Eventually, that became the Delano Oil Works, which was a pretty famous oil works in New Bedford. But this object, is so representative of the history of Yankee whaling. You could almost tell the whole history with just this.
Just this.
The Leonard Oil Works was one of the largest of its kind. Oliver Crocker was a major ship owner and a candle refiner in New Bedford. This thing was invented and made there in that place. And so in order to create a better spermaceti candle for the market, which goes way back into the 1750s in Newport, which is where that Aaron Lopez and Jacob Rivera, these Jewish immigrants from Spain settled in Newport and worked out how to process spermaceti into candles. So the whole story is really, really interesting, and they were very valuable because spermaceti candles, let's face it, they changed the world. They made.
Why did it change it? What was so special about a spermaceti candle
because
compared to a different type, like a tallow candle or something?
They were a hard wax.
Yep.
They burnt bright for a long time, and they didn't have any smell.
Yeah.
And they were completely reliable. And so you could have a couple of candles lit at night, and it would light your room. These sort of tallow or what they call grease lamps,
Yep.
which is just sheep fat.
Yeah.
would
Smoky,
just
stinky,
sort of tone down the darkness enough to make it dismal, as Mark Twain said. So it just sort of cast this little sort of gloom, but a spermaceti candle was a real thing. I mean, you got light out of that. And
Amazing.
And in the process.
Here, I'm gonna just scoot this back over, and we can. Should we bring out that lamp?
Yeah, and also the oil itself.
Yeah.
So in the processing of the spermaceti.
You mean the oil, so the rest of the blubber?
Could come from the blubber, could also come from pressing the spermaceti, but one way or the other, it had to be done in the cold, right? So in order to process oil or spermaceti, it had to be done either in the winter months or from casks that had been packed in ice and chilled to a certain temperature. And then you could pack it in bags and put it under an enormous screw press. So you pack that cold material in burlap bags and you stack them all up, and then you have these enormous screw press that would 2,000 pounds per square foot that would press, compact, and all that beautiful oil, that
Would seep
first
out,
winter pressing of the oil would flow out, and that was
What
your
you would
best
lamp oil.
your best lamp oil. Exactly so. And this stuff burns really well too, as well, and it burns for a long time, and it doesn't have any smell or smoke. So it was great. This is a game changer for life in well, many parts of the world.
We've got some other oil over here.
Yeah, these are various pressings. This is
This looks more modern though, doesn't it?
well, the
Actually,
label.
New London. The label is modern. New London, Connecticut.
Yeah,
Okay.
Darrow and Comstock were they were a ship's chandler, and it says here wholesale and retail hardware as well. And sperm oil, even though the Yankee whale fishery sort of disappeared by the 19-teens, Americans continued to buy millions of gallons of sperm oil every year. They just didn't buy.
What for?
They just didn't. They didn't hunt the animals themselves. They bought it from other nations that did.
Yeah.
Leather tanning was a
Yep.
big one, a really big one. Screw cutting, super fine lubrication.
Well, we didn't really talk about
crayons.
lubrication that much yet.
No,
Could we talk a
haven't.
little
We
bit
could
about
talk,
lubrication?
Well, sure. I mean, at a hardware
Yeah.
a hardware dealer like this, there was a preservative quality to sperm oil as well. So, yeah, it would lubricate.
I mean, we have lots of watch.
Common things.
Yeah, we have watch oil. That's
Right. Well, those
yeah.
are that's a different gauge of this kind of
Okay.
oil, and
There's sewing
see-
machine oil.
yeah, exactly
kinds of
so.
stuff? Okay.
Fine lubrication.
We have one other thing here.
Hey, what's that?
Yeah. so I have a feeling you know what this is, Mike.
Why don't you tell me?
Yeah, so this is a sperm whale tooth. It's actually a
Yeah.
lovely large sperm whale tooth, and
It
you can
is.
see here. You can see where the gum line was, and you can see this is what we always refer to as like a raw tooth. But
Yeah.
what's amazing is if you turn this
Wow.
particular one around, you have this lovely scene. And it's
That's
actually
fabulous, isn't it?
a whaling scene.
Yeah.
And this is called scrimshaw. So scrimshaw is the carving on the ivory or bone of a marine mammal at sea on a whale ship. And this particular one, you've got this really cool scene of things that we've just been talking about,
Yeah.
right? Would that be the
Yep,
blanket piece?
Yep, that's the blanket piece
Yeah.
cutting in a whale.
Yeah, and you've got you've got the little whale boats down here. You can see there's some whaling in action, and I love this. It says the tooth of a sperm whale, captured by the Captain McCarty in the bark Adventure, August 10th, 1852, and then he gives the latitude and longitude,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing. And we have lots of this, but this was not something people were selling. This was not like oil. This was a souvenir, right? This was an object that
yeah.
you made
Yeah,
out of complete
that's
boredom, right?
That's
Because
right.
there was lots of time on a whaling vessel. You're out at sea for a long time, and you might have a lot of downtime. And this would be a way that you could pass the time.
Yep. And this is exquisite. I mean, look.
That's a
look
beautiful
at the,
one.
I mean, look at the engraving on that. Look how fine that is. That's really a great thing.
Yeah,
Wow, that's really wonderful.
yeah.
It
That
didn't
one's-
have any market value.
Right, exactly. Not until today.
Right. So as a product,
Right.
not until today.
Yeah.
Right. So collecting scrimshaw, I guess.
Collecting scrimshaw is a different story, but during the period we're
that's
talking
a good
about,
point.
yeah, this was not something that people were people were
good point.
purchasing.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's something that maybe you would have done and brought home to your loved one, or kept for yourself.
Or kept for yourself.
Yeah. So other things that I know that there are other products of whaling because there are different types of whales, right? So we've talked a lot about sperm whales, but there are whales with teeth and there are whales with baleen. And so could we talk a little bit about baleen? I actually pulled out a piece of baleen for us
Wow, look
here.
at that.
This is a big piece. I
That
don't
is
know,
that's
Mike,
a
if you
pretty
know if this
good-sized
is a
piece.
right whale piece or a bowhead piece or maybe hard to tell. From,
Well, it's hard to tell. It's probably
Yeah.
most likely it's bowhead, just simply because there were so many of them, and it's got that deep dark. It's
like the
it's
dark
got a real
color,
dark.
yeah.
When this is polished, it'll
Yeah,
look.
and it's
it'll
really
look
long.
black. you
Did
know, like
bowheads
these-
have the longest of the
They
baleen?
do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and and actually, this might have even been a short piece if you think about how long.
Yeah.
They
Probably probably why we have it.
Yeah.
It never made it into anything.
Yeah.
So these things would be anywhere from 7 to 12 to 15 feet long.
Right.
And
the whale uses it because these types of whales were filter feeders, right?
That's
so
right,
they're
yeah.
taking big gulps of water and, am I right? They use their tongue to press.
That's right.
And all of the small creatures that
So
they would eat, krill, and
filter out,
fish. Yep.
filter out plankton. These, bowheads and the various right whales eat plankton. And so this is very fine hair that plankton would stick to that, right?
Yeah.
And there would be about 400 plates
Yeah.
of baleen in the mouth of a
That's
big
amazing.
of a big one of the right whales or a bowhead
Yeah.
whale, and it had a great market value, tremendous market value.
What? And I actually kind of feel like I would like to show
Yeah,
its
sure.
flexibility a little bit here.
You got it?
Yeah.
All right,
So
good. Yeah,
can
look at
you
that.
see how flexible that is?
Yep.
Which I think actually leads us to talk about why it was so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So here I'll put it down really quickly, and we can
Yep.
very carefully, not quickly, and we'll talk about. We've got another piece on the table over here.
Oh, yeah, look at
by
these.
you, Mike.
These are really cool.
Yeah, so what were people doing? We know we've talked about how whales use the baleen, but what were people doing with baleen?
Well, it all has to do with women's clothes. Oh, a lot of whaling has to do with women's clothes, right?
Sweet and handsome.
Well, that's right. So these were various stiffeners of various kinds for various garments.
Yeah.
Sometimes, in a hoop skirt in the 1860s, these pieces would be the entire hoop at the bottom of the skirt. Sometimes they were used in corsets, so to create stiffeners in corsets. Sometimes they were used in men's collars, so little short ones, and I've seen boxes full of collar stays.
Yeah, we have lots of little collar stays.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the garment industry really drove much of the late 19th century whale fishery, actually, out of San Francisco to the Western Arctic. But baleen had parasols were enormous.
Yeah, I think about parasols, fishing rods sometimes,
fishing rods,
and buggy whips and
musical instruments of various kinds, weaponry of various kinds, anything where that required flexibility and repeated use. So you said buggy whips. That was a big deal. There were a lot of buggy whip manufacturers in the U.S. and making a nice buggy whip was, kind of a social statement.
Yeah. Excellent. So I think we've talked about almost everything that we have on the table. Mike, is there anything else you want to add in about the why of whaling? Why we were out doing this, doing this really. This monstrous activity.
Well, it was
on the high seas. Why men were risking their lives and out at sea for years at a time, and all for oil and.
It
baleen.
was a way for people to make a living. So as soon as Americans figured out that they didn't have to do that anymore, they stopped doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Other people continued. The whale fishery in the late 19th century, even though there was plenty of sperm whaling that went on, it was shrinking. Oddly enough, as American whaling was shrinking in the 19-teens, European whaling was exploding at the same time. And Americans just were interested in other things. The country was moving westward. Everything was going on in the American West. And so a lot of the fortunes that were made, manufacturing and selling spermaceti candles and sperm oil on the retail market and the wholesale market, went into real estate, went into railroads, went into other investments, and this highly risky and dangerous business, an expensive business, just sort of shrank. It got smaller. But from 1750 to right up to the Civil War, vast fortunes were made. Communities came together. It takes a community to build and outfit a whaler. And at the height of Yankee whaling I think it was 1846, there were 742 whale ships in the American fleet.
I like that you said the word community, because I think that's something kind of interesting about whale ships, right? Is that whalers would often meet out at sea and many times knew each other.
They knew each
correct?
other.
A lot of times cousins were on different
Brothers.
vessels and they did something called gamming, right? Where two or more vessels would come together and often exchange, visit with each other.
Sure.
So that was a pretty regular thing.
And the
These
women
were
in the
like
community
floating
too.
women were in the community
sure,
too.
I mean,
yeah.
the women who marry, a woman marries a whaling master. This guy's going to go away for 4 years, come back for 2 months, and go away for 4 years.
Yeah.
Which is, fine for him. It's not so nice for her, and it might not even be nice for him. But that's how you earned your living,
Right.
And so many women chose to sail with their husbands on shipboard. So making those gams, which
Yeah.
are absolutely a part of the whaling culture on the high sea,
Right.
suddenly adds a new dimension to the community, which is, was a man's world for most of it, and yet families begin to become a regular part of the commercial whale fishery in the 1850s right up to the end. You see, women and kids, little kids are on a whale ship,
Yeah.
and they get tired of being on the whale ship, so they hang out in Honolulu, or they hang out in Sydney, or they hang out, at the Bay
Must
of
have been
Islands.
tough. Yeah.
Someplace, San Francisco, and then they'll get on the ship when they feel like it.
Yeah.
And so that idea of community and all that means was transported out into the world. So you have Puritan New Englanders or Quaker New Englanders suddenly in 1858 living in Honolulu,
Yeah.
right? Or Papeete, or Guam. These are places that had been isolated from Western influence, meaningful Western influence, pretty much forever.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, all of a sudden, there's this Western culture, and it's not just the men now, it's the women too.
Right.
And there's a lot of impacts there, a lot of social strata.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Mike, this has been so interesting talking about all this with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Excellent conversation. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Sea Class, The Why of Whaling.